Millionaire was paralyzed after seeing woman in wheelchair asking for help with two boys identical to him. The rain poured mercilessly over Manhattan's busy streets that Thursday afternoon. Two 8-year-old boys ran through the downpour, chasing after a small, limping stray dog that was about to cross the street. Behind them, a woman in a wheelchair called out desperately, "Thomas! Michael, stop!" A black limousine turned the corner at that exact moment. Inside, Robert Harrison III was reviewing contract numbers on his tablet when his driver slammed on the brakes. The CEO's coffee spilled all over his $3,000 suit as the vehicle screeched to a halt just inches from the boys. "What the hell?" Robert burst out of the car, ready to scold whoever had caused this mess. But the words died in his throat when he saw them. Two identical boys with startling blue eyes. His eyes. That's when he noticed her. Sarah Mitchell sat in her wheelchair, drenched from the rain, her long brown hair plastered to her face. 8 years had passed, but he would recognize her anywhere. Their eyes met, and suddenly he was transported back to that last day in his office, when he had chosen his reputation over love. Sarah's face went pale. Her hands trembled on the wheelchair's armrests. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison," she whispered, just before her eyes rolled back and she slumped forward in her chair. Robert moved without thinking, rushing to catch her before she fell. The boys crowded around their mother, fear written across their small faces. "Mom, Mom, wake up!" The slightly taller one cried out. "James, get the car door." Robert ordered his driver. He couldn't leave them in this rain. What would the press say if they found out Robert Harrison had abandoned a disabled woman and 2 children in a storm? But deep down he knew this had nothing to do with the press. Those boys, they were unmistakably his sons. At the private hospital 20 minutes later, Robert paced the waiting room, while the boys huddled together on plastic chairs, watching him suspiciously. The taller one, Michael, he'd learned, kept a protective arm around his brother Thomas. "Are you really the man from Mom's old pictures?" Thomas asked suddenly, his voice small but steady. Before Robert could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from his wife Victoria. "Care to explain this?" Attached was a photo, clearly taken moments ago, of him helping Sarah into his car. His blood ran cold. "Mr. Harrison?" A nurse appeared. "Ms. Mitchell is awake. She's asking for her sons." The boys rushed past him into their mother's room. Robert followed more slowly, his heart pounding. Sarah sat propped up in bed, color returning to her cheeks as she hugged her children. Their children. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Sarah nodded, then turned to the boys. "Could you two be brave and go get Mom some water?" Once they were alone, the weight of 8 years of silence hung between them. "They're mine, aren't they?" Robert's voice cracked. "Would it have made a difference?" Sarah's reply was soft but sharp. "You made your choice, Robert. You chose your perfect life with Victoria. You chose your family's reputation. You chose everything else over us. I didn't know, if I had known about twins." "You knew I was pregnant," Sarah cut him off. "That should have been enough." Robert sank into a chair, his perfectly ordered world crumbling around him. "Why are you in that wheelchair?" "Life happened," Sarah replied simply. "Not that you were around to notice." Before Robert could respond, his phone buzzed again. His mother, Elizabeth. "Come home immediately. We need to discuss the situation." Looking at Sarah's fierce expression as she held their sons, Robert knew his life of careful lies was about to explode. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. Out in the hall, a nurse made a discreet phone call. "Mrs. Harrison, your sources were right. Your husband just found them." Robert walked into his family's mansion, his mind still reeling from the hospital encounter. Elizabeth Harrison stood in the foyer, her face stern. "In my study, now." He followed his mother, feeling like a schoolboy about to be scolded. The study walls held generations of Harrison family portraits. Elizabeth sat behind the mahogany desk and pulled out a thick folder. 8 years of surveillance photos, she said, spreading them across the desk. "Your wife has been watching them all this time." Robert's hands shook as he picked up the photos. Sarah pregnant. Sarah in a hospital bed with newborn twins, the boys' first steps, school events, and finally the accident that put her in the wheelchair. Victoria knew. His voice cracked. "Let me tell you what really happened 8 years ago," Elizabeth said. 8 years earlier. Sarah stood in Robert's office, holding the pregnancy test. I don't expect anything from you. I just thought you should know. Robert stepped closer, hope rising in his chest. A baby. His baby. Something he'd always wanted, but Victoria had refused. Then his office door burst open. Victoria stormed in, waving papers. I found the prenatal vitamins in her desk. Victoria, I can explain. No need, Victoria cut him off. Either you handle this or I release proof of every illegal deal your father made to build this company. Sarah's face went pale. What illegal deals? Victoria smiled coldly. Why do you think Robert's father died in prison? Sign the agreement, take the money and disappear, or watch Robert join his father behind bars. Present day. I didn't know about the blackmail, Robert whispered. There's more. Elizabeth pulled out another file. Victoria had an accident in college. She can't have children. She's been lying to you all these years about not wanting them. Robert's phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. Sarah was being discharged. He stood up. Where are you going? To fix my mistakes. Robert, wait. Elizabeth handed him one last photo. Victoria's been paying someone to watch them. The accident that put Sarah in that wheelchair? It wasn't an accident. At the hospital, Sarah was struggling to transfer into her wheelchair while the twins gathered her things. Robert stepped in to help, but Michael blocked his way. We don't need your help, the boy said firmly. We've managed just fine without you. Thomas touched his brother's arm. Michael, Mom's tired. Sarah looked up at Robert. Why are you back? I know about Victoria's blackmail, about the surveillance. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix 8 years of silence, Sarah whispered. Sorry doesn't help when you're alone in a delivery room having twins. Sorry doesn't pay medical bills or explain to your children why their father chose money over them. Mom? Thomas's voice quivered. Is he really our dad? Sarah closed her eyes. Yes, sweetie, he is. But he left us, Michael said, just like you always said, some people choose money over love. Robert felt each word like a knife. I want to make things right. Mr. Harrison? A nurse appeared. Your wife is here. Victoria stood in the doorway, elegant as ever, her eyes locked onto the twins. Well, the happy family reunion. How could you? Robert demanded. 8 years of watching them? The accident? Victoria's smile never wavered. I protected our life, our reputation. Darling, everything I did was for us. You made me abandon my children. No, Robert. You did that all on your own. I just gave you the push you needed. Victoria turned to Sarah. I warned you 8 years ago, stay away from my husband. Sarah straightened in her wheelchair. Funny thing about threats, Victoria. They only work when you have something to lose. Thanks to you, I already lost everything. So what are you going to do now? Victoria's smile turned dangerous. Oh, you have no idea what I'm capable of. This is just the beginning. As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared. Miss Mitchell, we need you to leave hospital premises immediately. Private property. Robert watched helplessly as Sarah and the twins were escorted out. Victoria slipped her arm through his. Come, darling. We have damage control to handle. But Robert couldn't move, his mother's words echoing in his mind. The accident wasn't an accident. What else had Victoria done? And more importantly, what was she planning to do next? Sarah wheeled into her small apartment, exhausted from the hospital ordeal. Boys, please get ready for bed. But Mom, it's only 7, Michael protested. I need to make some calls about tomorrow's piano lessons, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Once the twins were in their room, Sarah let the tears fall. 8 years of carefully constructed walls had crumbled in a single afternoon. Her phone buzzed, another text from an unknown number. Hope you enjoyed the family reunion. It won't last. Through the thin walls, she heard Thomas playing his keyboard with headphones on. The boy had inherited her love for music. Michael was the fighter, always protecting them both. They'd grown up too fast, especially after the accident. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering that day at the music store. 1 year earlier. Mrs. Peterson, I can stay late to help inventory the new shipment, Sarah offered, counting the day's earnings. Such a dear, the elderly store owner smiled. But I'm sure the boys need you home. They're at chess club until 6. I could use the extra hours. Sarah climbed the storage ladder to check the top shelves. She noticed a man in a suit watching through the window but thought nothing of it. Then the ladder shook violently. She remembered falling, the crack of her spine hitting the counter, Mrs. Peterson's scream. The man in the suit was gone. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. Lucky. Sarah almost laughed at the word. Present day. A knock at the door snapped her back. Through the peephole, she saw a tall man in a white coat. Miss Mitchell, I'm Dr. James Morrison. The hospital sent me to follow up on your case. Sarah opened the door cautiously. I don't remember requesting a follow-up. It's complimentary, he smiled warmly. I specialize in spinal cord injuries. May I come in? Before Sarah could answer, the twins emerged from their room. Mom, we heard voices, Michael said, positioning himself between Sarah and the stranger. Dr. Morrison knelt to the boy's level. You must be the brave young men who help your mother. I'm Dr. Morrison. Thomas peeked out from behind Michael. Can you help Mom walk again? Thomas, Sarah warned softly. Actually, Dr. Morrison said, I believe I can. There's a new treatment program that's showing remarkable results. I'd like to discuss it with your mother. Sarah noticed how his eyes lingered on the boys' faces. Something felt off. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. Watch out for friendly doctors bearing gifts. I appreciate the offer, Sarah said firmly, but we're not interested. At least take my card, he insisted. The treatment would be fully funded. Someone wants to help you, Miss Mitchell. After he left, Sarah wheeled to the window. A black car was parked across the street. Inside, a man spoke into a phone. The next morning, Sarah taught her first piano student of the day while the twins got ready for school. Mom, Thomas called. Kids at school are showing everyone a news article about Dad. Sarah's student hit a wrong note. That's enough for today, Jenny. We'll continue next week. After Jenny left, Sarah checked online. Her heart sank. The headline read, Harrison Industries CEO's secret family exposed. We're not going to school, Michael announced. Yes, you are, Sarah said firmly. We don't run from problems. Like Dad ran from us? Michael's voice cracked. Sarah pulled him close. Your father made his choices, we make ours, and we choose to be strong. The door buzzed. Elizabeth Harrison stood in the hallway. May I come in? There are some things you need to know about Victoria, and that doctor who visited you. Sarah glanced at the twins, then back at Elizabeth. Boys, get your backpacks. Mrs. Torres will walk you to school today. Once the twins left, Elizabeth sat down heavily. Victoria's been planning something. That accident at the music store, it was just the beginning. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm dying. Elizabeth said simply, and I want to know my grandchildren before I go. But first, we need to protect them from Victoria. She's more dangerous than you know. Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway. Dr. Morrison appeared in the doorway, his friendly smile gone. Ladies, he said, Victoria sends her regards. Robert sat in his office, staring at financial reports that made his blood run cold. Millions of dollars had been systematically siphoned from Harrison Industries over the past 8 years. His phone rang. Mr. Harrison, the board requests an emergency meeting. Now. In the boardroom, 12 stern faces greeted him. Richard Chen, head of the board, spoke first. Care to explain these transfers to offshore accounts? I just discovered them myself. They bear your signature. Richard pushed documents across the table. These signatures are forged, Robert insisted, examining the papers. Like the signatures on those illegal deals your father made? Richard's eyes narrowed. The ones that sent him to prison? Robert's phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Victoria's with Sarah. Come quickly. At Sarah's apartment, Robert found Elizabeth blocking Dr. Morrison's entry. Step aside, Mrs. Harrison, Morrison warned. I know who you really are, Elizabeth said. Victoria's paid quite a lot to keep your medical license fraud quiet. Morrison's smile vanished. Speaking of secrets, how's your cancer treatment going? Robert grabbed Morrison's shoulder. Get out. Your wife's orders trump yours, Morrison smirked. After all, she's the one with controlling interest in Harrison Industries now. Inside, Victoria sat across from Sarah. You really should accept Dr. Morrison's treatment offer. Accidents happen so easily. Like the music store accident? Sarah's voice was steady. Oh, you figured that out? Victoria laughed. Consider it a warning. One that you failed to heed. Mom? Thomas's voice came from the doorway. He'd come home early from school. Why is everyone here? Victoria turned, her face softening. Hello, Thomas. I'm your stepmother. You're the one who made Dad leave us. Michael appeared behind his brother. Such dramatic children, Victoria sighed. I simply helped your father make the right choice, for everyone. By blackmailing him? Elizabeth stepped in. By hiring Morrison to cause Sarah's accident? Thomas gasped. Michael's fists clenched. Careful, Elizabeth, Victoria warned. Stress isn't good for terminal patients. What? Robert turned to his mother. Stage 4, Elizabeth said quietly. I wanted to wait for the right time. Victoria stood. Well, this has been enlightening. Dr. Morrison will be in touch about the treatment. I suggest you accept. Refusing would be unwise. After they left, Thomas sat at his keyboard but didn't play. Why did you stop playing? Sarah asked softly. Music can't fix anything, Thomas whispered. Michael kicked the wall. I hate them all. The board's meeting about the missing millions, Robert said. Victoria's been planning this for years. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text with a video attachment. They watched in horror as a younger Victoria spoke to someone off camera. Make sure the latter looks like an accident. I want her hurt, not dead. Yet. I'm calling the police. Robert reached for his phone. With what proof? Sarah asked. A mysterious text from an unknown number? Elizabeth touched the keyboard. Thomas, would you play for your grandmother? I said music can't fix anything. Thomas ran to his room. He hasn't played since my accident, Sarah explained. And Michael's been getting into fights at school, Robert added, remembering the principal's calls. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Treatment starts tomorrow, or the next accident won't be so gentle. We need to get ahead of her, Elizabeth said. Robert, there's something in your father's old files, something Victoria doesn't know about. What? Evidence of her own crimes. I've been saving it for the right moment. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Elizabeth coughed, her face pale, because I was part of it, part of forcing Sarah away. I need to make it right before. She couldn't finish. Through the walls, they heard Thomas crying, Michael's angry kicks against furniture. Outside, Morrison's car still waited. Sarah wheeled to the window. We're all broken, aren't we? Robert touched her shoulder. She didn't pull away. Then we'll fix this together, he said. All of us. But Victoria's next move would test that promise sooner than any of them expected. Sarah found the USB drive taped under her wheelchair that morning. She plugged it into her laptop, hands shaking. Victoria's voice filled the room. If you ever tell Robert about the baby, I'll destroy you both. His father's already in prison. Want to guess who's next? Sarah quickly stopped the recording as the twins came out for breakfast. Mom, I don't feel good, Thomas said. My stomach hurts. You said that yesterday, Michael rolled his eyes. He's just scared of the kids at school. They keep showing us articles about Dad, Thomas whispered. Sarah's phone lit up with a text from Robert. Board meeting leaked to press. Stock dropping. Victoria missing. Another message followed, this one from an unknown number. Check your bank account. Sarah logged in and froze. Her modest savings had been wiped clean. Boys were having breakfast at Grandma Elizabeth's today. At the Harrison mansion, Elizabeth was reviewing old files when they arrived. Sarah, look at this. She handed over a stack of papers. Victoria's been embezzling money for years. But that's not all. Sarah read through the documents, her face paling. These medical records. She was pregnant in college, Elizabeth explained. The accident that left her unable to have children, it was no accident. She did it to herself, to trap her wealthy boyfriend. When he left anyway, she set her sights on Robert. The front door slammed. Robert stormed in, his face ashen. The board suspended me. Victoria's claiming I orchestrated the embezzlement. She can't prove that, Elizabeth started. She has documents, years of evidence she's been building against me. Sarah pulled out the USB drive. Listen to this. They played Victoria's old threat. Robert sank into a chair. All these years, he whispered. I thought I was protecting my family's legacy. Instead, I was helping her destroy it. Elizabeth suddenly clutched her chest, coughing violently. Mom? I'm fine, she wheezed. The treatment's just harder some days. Sarah's phone buzzed. Dr. Morrison, treatment starts tomorrow, no more delays. I found this in Dad's old journal. Robert held up a worn notebook. He tried to warn me about Victoria before he died in prison. I never read it. The doorbell rang. A courier delivered an envelope. Inside was a single photo, Thomas and Michael walking to school, a red X marked over them. That's it, Sarah decided. We're going to the police. With what? Robert asked. A threatening photo? An old recording? With this, Elizabeth pulled out a thick file. Everything Victoria's done, every crime, every manipulation. I've been collecting evidence for years. Why didn't you stop her sooner? Sarah demanded. Because I agreed with her. Elizabeth's voice broke. I thought you were just a gold digger. I helped drive you away. And now... She gestured to her frail body. Now I have months left to make it right. Upstairs, a piano melody drifted down. Thomas was playing for the first time since the accident. He's playing my favorite song, Sarah whispered. The music stopped abruptly. A crash followed. They rushed upstairs. Thomas lay unconscious by the piano. He's burning up. Sarah touched his forehead. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. Dr. Morrison stood in the doorway. The medication in his breakfast cereal was just a warning dose. You poisoned my son? Sarah lunged for him, falling from her wheelchair. Morrison stepped back. Victoria's orders were clear. Accept the treatment or the next dose won't be so mild. Michael tackled Morrison's legs. Robert grabbed the doctor's coat. A gun fell from Morrison's pocket. Now, Victoria appeared behind him. Let's all calm down before someone gets hurt. Sarah, dear, about that treatment. Elizabeth silently pressed record on her phone as Thomas lay unconscious, and Sarah struggled on the floor, watching Victoria reveal her true colors. The real battle was just beginning. The emergency room buzzed with activity as doctors rushed Thomas into treatment. Sarah held Michael's hand while Robert paced the waiting room. The toxicology report shows a dangerous combination of drugs, Dr. Peters explained. He'll need a bone marrow transplant. The poison has affected his system severely. I'll do it. Michael stepped forward. We need to test both parents first, the doctor said. Siblings aren't always the best match. Victoria watched from the hallway, Morrison at her side. Police officers stood nearby taking Elizabeth's statement about the poisoning attempt. Mrs. Harrison, you're saying Dr. Morrison confessed? I have it recorded. Elizabeth played the audio. Morrison's face dropped. He turned to run, but officers caught him. Victoria Harrison, an officer approached. We need to ask you some questions. About what? I'm just here concerned about my stepson. Step away from the child, the officer warned as Victoria moved toward Thomas's room. You can't prove anything, Victoria smiled. That recording won't hold up in court. Sarah wheeled forward. But the hospital's security footage will. Victoria's smile faltered. Robert stepped between them. How could you do this? He demanded. He's just a child. I did it for us, Victoria hissed. Everything was perfect before she came back. Perfect? Elizabeth's voice shook. You've been stealing from the company for years. The board still believes Robert did it. Victoria straightened her jacket. And a grieving widow will look much more sympathetic running the company than a disgraced CEO. Widow, Sarah whispered. Victoria pulled out a gun. Really, Robert, you should have checked Morrison's coat more carefully when you grabbed him. The officers drew their weapons. Drop the gun. You know what's funny? Victoria's hand trembled. I really did love you, Robert, but you never wanted me. Just an heir. Put the gun down, Robert said calmly. I gave up everything for you. Victoria's voice rose. I made myself barren to trap my first love. When he left anyway, I found you. Perfect, Robert Harrison. But you wanted children, so I made sure you couldn't have them with anyone else. The music store accident, Sarah realized. You planned to kill me. You weren't supposed to survive. Victoria's eyes were wild. And now your precious son needs bone marrow? Let me solve all our problems. She aimed at Robert. A small voice cut through the tension. Dad? Thomas stood in the doorway of his room, pale and swaying. Victoria turned. Sarah saw her finger tighten on the trigger. No? Sarah launched herself from the wheelchair, tackling Victoria as the gun went off. The bullet hit the wall. Officers swarmed Victoria. Mom, both boys screamed. Sarah lay on the floor, unable to move. The fall had re-injured her spine. Hours later, the hospital room was quiet. Thomas slept, while machines beeped steadily. Sarah lay in the next bed, doctors having confirmed no permanent damage from her fall. The tests came back. Dr. Peters entered. Robert, you're a perfect match for the bone marrow transplant. Michael, who hadn't left his brother's side, looked up. So you can save him? Yes. Robert squeezed his son's shoulder. I can finally do something right for this family. Elizabeth watched from her chair, oxygen tank at her side. Victoria's confession was recorded. The board will reinstate you. None of that matters right now, Robert said. Sarah reached for his hand. Thomas needs you. We all do. Outside the room, detectives questioned Victoria. Her lawyer stood nearby as she detailed years of crimes, her composure finally broken. "She won't hurt us again," Elizabeth promised. But Sarah noticed Michael's fists clenched, his eyes dark with anger. Thomas whimpered in his sleep, and Robert's hand trembled in hers. The physical dangers might be over, but the real healing was just beginning. "When does the transplant start?" Michael asked. "Tomorrow morning," Dr. Peters replied. "Both father and son will need to be strong." Robert looked at his family. Sarah in her hospital bed, Thomas fighting for his life, Michael trying to be brave, and his dying mother keeping watch over them all. Strong was the only choice they had left. 3 weeks after the transplant, the Harrison Foundation's annual gala arrived. Robert had insisted on keeping the event despite everything. "The foundation helps thousands of children," he explained to Sarah. "We can't let Victoria destroy that too." Sarah adjusted her dress in the wheelchair, nervous about facing Connecticut's elite society. Dr. James Morrison's arrest and Victoria's crimes had been front-page news for weeks. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Robert. "The board reinstated me yesterday. They need to see our family united." The twins emerged in matching suits. Thomas, still pale from treatment, sat at the ballroom's grand piano. "You don't have to play," Sarah touched his arm. "I want to." Thomas straightened his shoulders. "For us." The gala buzzed with whispers as Robert entered with Sarah and the boys. Elizabeth followed, her oxygen tank disguised in a designer bag. "Robert Harrison has some nerve," a board member muttered. "Bringing his mistress here," another added. Thomas took his place at the piano. His fingers trembled over the keys. "I can't," he whispered. Michael squeezed his shoulder. "Remember what Mom says? We don't run from problems." Thomas began to play. The familiar melody of Amazing Grace filled the room. Richard Chen approached Robert. "The board meeting's tomorrow. Victoria's confession changed things, but there are still questions." "About the missing money?" Robert asked. "About your judgment." Richard glanced at Sarah. "The scandal isn't finished." Victoria stood in the doorway, ignoring the security guards. "You're not welcome here," Elizabeth stepped forward. "Oh, but I am," Victoria smiled. "The foundation's bylaws state all major donors must be admitted to events." She walked to the center of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement." "Security," Robert called. "Before you remove me," Victoria's voice carried across the ballroom, "you should know where your charitable donations really went." She pulled out a stack of papers. 8 years of fraud. Every major donor in this room was scammed, and I have proof Robert Harrison orchestrated all of it. The room erupted in chaos. Thomas's music stopped. "That's enough." Sarah's voice cut through the noise. "You want to talk about fraud? Let's talk about how you caused my accident, how you poisoned an 8-year-old boy." "Proves how far Robert's mistress will go to defend him," Victoria smirked. "She's not my mistress." Robert took the microphone. "She's the woman I should have married 8 years ago. Victoria blackmailed me, stole from the company, and tried to kill my son." "Your son?" Victoria laughed. "Proof. See how he admits to the scandal?" "The only scandal," Elizabeth's voice shook with anger, "is how you manipulated my family, how you made us hurt an innocent woman and 2 beautiful boys." Victoria pulled out a gun. Guests screamed. "Beautiful boys?" She aimed at Thomas. "They ruined everything." Michael jumped in front of his brother. Sarah wheeled forward. "You really want to add child murder to your charges?" Sarah asked calmly. "You just won't die, will you?" Victoria's hand shook. Thomas started playing again, the same song his mother taught him years ago. "Stop that!" Victoria turned to him. A security guard tackled her. The gun went off. Sarah screamed as Robert fell. "Dad!" The twins ran to him. Blood spread across Robert's shirt. "Get a doctor!" Elizabeth shouted. Victoria laughed hysterically as police handcuffed her. "See, I told you I'd make him pay." Sarah held Robert's hand while paramedics worked. "Stay with us," she whispered. "We just found you." "The children," Robert's voice was weak. "Take care." "No," Sarah squeezed his hand. "You're going to take care of them yourself." Thomas returned to the piano, playing through his tears. "Your son needs you to hear him play," Sarah said firmly. Elizabeth watched the paramedics load Robert into an ambulance, her own strength fading. "This isn't how our story ends," she promised Sarah. "Not after everything." But as Victoria was led away screaming and Robert fought for his life, no one knew if this was the beginning of healing or the final chapter of the Harrison family legacy. The piano music followed them into the night. A son playing for his father's life, the hospital waiting room had become their second home. Sarah watched the twins sleeping on uncomfortable chairs, while Elizabeth paced, oxygen tank wheeling beside her. Family of Robert Harrison? Dr. Peters emerged from surgery. The bullet missed his heart, he explained. He's stable, but weak. In the recovery room, Robert opened his eyes to find Thomas holding his hand. You played beautifully, Robert whispered. I kept playing after you got shot, Thomas said. Mom says music heals people. Michael stood by the window. Victoria's on TV. They turned on the small hospital room TV. Victoria sat in prison orange, cameras flashing. I admit to everything, she read from a statement. The embezzlement, Sarah Mitchell's accident, the attempt on Thomas Harrison's life. I acted alone. She's protecting someone, Elizabeth said. Robert tried to sit up. Morrison, he's still out on bail. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Morrison. Victoria took the fall. My turn to finish the job. He's at the house. Sarah realized. The evidence Elizabeth collected. I'll send security. Robert reached for his phone. No time. Elizabeth grabbed her keys. I know where the files are. Mom, you're not strong enough. This is my mess to fix. Elizabeth headed for the door. I helped Victoria destroy this family. I won't let Morrison destroy what's left. I'm coming with you, Sarah said. You can't, Robert protested. Your wheelchair is faster than Elizabeth's oxygen tank. Sarah turned to the twins. Stay with your father. At the Harrison mansion, lights flickered in the study. He's here, Elizabeth whispered. They found Morrison emptying filing cabinets. Looking for these? Elizabeth held up a flash drive. Morrison spun around. The evidence dies with you. Wara asked. Victoria's confessed. Because I'm her husband, Morrison smiled. Her first love. The one who left. We planned everything together, getting her close to Robert, pushing you away. But she fell in love with him for real, ruined all our plans. You made her sterile, Elizabeth realized. She agreed. Anything to trap a wealthy man. When Robert rejected her, we modified the plan. But she was supposed to kill him at the gala, take control of the company. Instead, she just confessed. Because she really loved him, Sarah says weakness. Morrison pulled out a syringe. Now, about that evidence. Elizabeth clutched her chest, gasping. Perfect timing, Morrison approached. A tragic heart attack while destroying evidence of her crimes. How loyal of you. Sarah wheeled between them. Touch her and I'll? You'll what? Run away. Elizabeth pulled an inhaler from her pocket and sprayed it in Morrison's eyes. Pepper spray? She smiled as he screamed. Police burst in, guns drawn. We heard everything, an officer said, holding up a recording device. Sarah held Elizabeth as she shook with pain. I had to make it right, Elizabeth whispered. At the hospital, they found Robert sitting with the twins. Morrison confessed, Sarah announced. It's over. Not quite, Elizabeth pulled out papers. Robert, I'm signing the company over to you. Full control. Mom, and she continued, I've set up trust funds for the boys. Everything I have goes to them. You'll be here to watch them grow up, Robert insisted. Elizabeth smiled sadly. We both know I won't, but I got to see our family whole again. That's enough. Thomas went to the piano in the hospital lobby. Michael followed. Play something happy, Michael said, for Grandma. The music filled the hallway as Elizabeth hugged her grandchildren. Promise me, she told Robert and Sarah, that you'll fill their lives with as much love as I've seen in these few weeks. We promise, they said together. Outside, reporters gathered as Morrison was led into a police car. Victoria watched from her prison cell as the news broke. James Morrison, arrested in connection with Harrison Industries scandal. She touched the TV screen. I did love you, Robert, she whispered. That's why I couldn't kill you. In the hospital, Thomas's music continued as their broken family began to heal. The truth had cost them dearly, but it had also set them free. 1 month after Morrison's arrest, Sarah sat in her physical therapy session, gripping the parallel bars. Just one step, the therapist encouraged. Sarah's legs trembled. After months of experimental treatment, feeling had slowly returned. You can do it, Mom. Thomas called from the piano in the therapy room. She lifted her foot. One step, then another. Robert watched from the doorway, his own recovery scar still healing. The board meeting went well? Sarah asked between breaths. Better than expected. The Harrison Foundation is launching a new program. For what? Single mothers, medical care, job training, housing assistance. Sarah's legs gave out. Robert caught her. "I've got you," he said. "That's what scares me," Sarah admitted, depending on someone again. At the prison, Victoria sat across from Elizabeth. "Why are you here?" Victoria asked. "Because you loved my son," Elizabeth said. "Enough to confess everything. Love destroyed everything I built." "No," Elizabeth coughed into a tissue. "Love saved what was left." Victoria noticed Elizabeth's frail appearance. "How long?" "Weeks, maybe. That's not why I'm here." Elizabeth pushed papers across the table. "Sign these." Divorce papers? And a full confession about Morrison's involvement. Give Robert closure. Victoria picked up the pen. "I did love him, and those boys? Show it by signing. Let them heal." At the Harrison mansion, Michael packed his room. "I don't want to move," he told his brother. "Mom says the new house is closer to her therapy," Thomas replied. "Everything's changing." "Not everything." Thomas sat at his piano. "We're still us." Robert appeared in the doorway. "Ready for visitors?" The boys ran downstairs. Sarah stood in the foyer, holding onto a walker. "Mom!" They rushed to hug her. "Careful," she laughed, still wobbly. Elizabeth watched from her wheelchair, oxygen flowing. "The doctor said you should rest," Robert told his mother. "And miss this?" Elizabeth smiled. "Never." Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "I signed the papers, I'm sorry." Robert read the message over her shoulder. "You okay?" "Getting there." Sarah took another shaky step. "One day at a time. Mrs. Harrison?" A nurse helped Elizabeth. "Time for your medication." "Stop fussing," Elizabeth waved her off. "My grandchildren are playing me a song." Thomas and Michael sat at the piano together, Thomas teaching Michael simple notes. "Remember when you said music can't fix anything?" Sarah asked Thomas. "I was wrong," he said. "It helped Dad get better." "And you," Michael added. "You started walking when Thomas played." Elizabeth closed her eyes, listening. The Harrison legacy isn't money or power, it's this. Family, music, love. Robert knelt beside her. "Mom, shh, let me have this moment." The doorbell rang. Richard Chen entered with the board members. "We've reviewed everything," Richard announced. "The Foundation's new direction, focusing on families in need. We approve." "And the first recipient?" Robert asked. "Sarah Mitchell's Rehabilitation Center for Single Mothers, fully funded." Sarah gripped her walker. "I never asked for." "You earned it," Elizabeth said firmly. "By surviving. By keeping our grandchildren strong. By forgiving us." "There's more," Richard continued. "Victoria provided evidence clearing Robert's father of all charges. His record will be expunged posthumously." Robert sat heavily. "Dad was innocent?" "Victoria and Morrison framed him to get control of the company." Elizabeth touched her son's hand. "Your father would be proud of the man you've become." The piano music swelled as Sarah took another step forward. The twins played together, and Robert held his dying mother's hand. Outside, reporters gathered as news broke. Harrison Industries announces revolutionary family support initiative. In her prison cell, Victoria watched the coverage, touching a photo of the twins. "Be better than me," she whispered. The Harrison family gathered around Elizabeth's chair, broken pieces slowly mending, creating something stronger than before. "Elizabeth Harrison's condition has worsened," Dr. Peters announced to the family gathered in the hospital room. "She's asking for everyone." Sarah walked slowly to Elizabeth's bedside, each step still a victory after months of therapy. The twins followed, Thomas carrying sheet music. "Play for me," Elizabeth whispered. Thomas set up his portable keyboard while Michael helped adjust Elizabeth's bed. "I have something to say first." Elizabeth's voice was weak but clear. "Robert, the safe in my study. The combination is your children's birthday." Robert opened his mouth to protest, but Elizabeth continued. "Inside, you'll find papers. Your father's real confession. He didn't die of heart failure in prison. He was poisoned by Morrison." "Mom, save your strength." "No, you need to know. He discovered Morrison and Victoria's plan. That's why they framed him." Elizabeth coughed. "I found out too late. That's why I started gathering evidence." Sarah gripped Robert's hand as Elizabeth turned to her. "Sarah, I failed you both 8 years ago, but watching you fight for my grandchildren, you're the daughter I always wanted." Thomas began to play softly. "My boys," Elizabeth smiled at the twins. "Michael, your strength protects this family. Thomas, your music heals it. Together, you're your father's redemption." Robert's phone buzzed. A message from the prison warden. "Victoria's requesting to see the twins." "Not now," Sarah said firmly. "Yes now," Elizabeth surprised them. She's part of their story, the woman who tried to destroy their family but couldn't break their spirit. I'll think about it, Robert said. Elizabeth reached for her oxygen mask. One last thing. Robert, that ring you've been carrying. Robert blushed. Sarah looked confused. How did you? A mother knows. Elizabeth smiled. Ask her before I go. Mom, don't talk like that. Robert Harrison, Elizabeth's voice strengthened. Don't waste any more time. Thomas changed the melody to Amazing Grace as Robert knelt beside Sarah's chair. I've been waiting for the perfect moment, he said, pulling out a ring. But Mom's right. We've wasted too much time. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Robert, marry me. Not because of the kids or guilt or my mother's wishes. Marry me because these past months showed me what I threw away 8 years ago. A love that survived everything we put it through. Michael rolled his eyes. Just say yes. Mom. Thomas never stopped playing as Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Elizabeth watched Robert slip the ring on Sarah's finger. Now I can rest. The wedding happens first, Sarah found her voice. You're walking me down the aisle. Deal, Elizabeth whispered. At the prison, Victoria received news of the engagement. Good, she told her therapist. They deserve happiness. Even though you lost everything? I never had anything real to lose, Victoria admitted. That's why I tried to destroy what they had. Back in the hospital, Elizabeth asked everyone but the twins to leave. Your grandmother needs to tell you something, she said when they were alone. About being strong. Michael leaned close. We know how to be strong. Mom taught us. She taught you to survive, Elizabeth corrected. I want to teach you to live, to forgive. Even Victoria? Thomas asked. Especially Victoria. Hate hurts the person holding it more than its target. The twins absorbed this as their grandmother grew tired. One more song, she requested. Thomas played while Michael held her hand. Outside the room, Robert and Sarah planned their wedding. A small ceremony, Sarah said. Whatever you want. I want your mother there. Robert watched through the window as Elizabeth smiled at her grandsons. Then we'll have it next week, here if we have to. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Congratulations. Mean it. Sometimes, Sarah said, healing comes from the most unexpected places. Elizabeth's monitor beeped steadily as Thomas played. Michael watched over them. And their parents planned a future none of them had dared to imagine months ago. A future built on forgiveness, strength, and the kind of love that survives the darkest storms. The hospital chapel transformed over a week. Elizabeth supervised from her wheelchair, directing flower arrangements between oxygen treatments. The arch needs to be higher, she instructed. Sarah's walking down that aisle standing tall. In physical therapy, Sarah practiced walking in a simple white dress. No wheelchair, she insisted, even as her legs trembled. Take it slow, her therapist warned. The twins watched from the doorway in their new suits. Mom's going to fall, Michael worried. No, she won't, Thomas said. Dad won't let her. In his office, Robert reviewed the evidence about his father's death. The toxicology report was altered, Richard Chen confirmed. Morrison's fingerprints are all over this. Does Victoria know? She just confessed to ordering the poisoning, said she's done hiding the truth. Robert's phone rang. The prison warden. Victoria's requesting to attend the wedding, under guard. Why? She says she needs to make peace, for everyone's sake. At the hospital, Elizabeth received more test results. The treatment isn't working, Dr. Peters said gently. How long? Days, maybe less. Elizabeth nodded. Long enough. In the chapel, Thomas practiced the wedding march. Play it again. Sarah called from the back. She stood straight, took one step, then another. Robert entered, stopped at the sight of her in white. You're supposed to wait until tomorrow, Sarah laughed. Mom. Michael burst in. Grandma's asking for everyone. They found Elizabeth propped up in bed, looking at old photos. Victoria should come, she announced. What? Robert stared. To heal, you need to face your fears. All of them. Sarah sat on the bed. She tried to kill us. And now she's trying to make amends. Let her. The twins exchanged looks. We're not scared of her, Michael said. Good. Elizabeth handed them an envelope. Because I need you to deliver this to her. At the prison, Victoria read Elizabeth's letter. She's dying, Thomas explained. And she wants me at the wedding? Victoria looked skeptical. She says hate hurts the person holding it, Michael quoted. Victoria wiped her eyes. Your grandmother's very wise. Will you come? Thomas asked. If your parents agree. Back at the hospital, Sarah made it all the way down the practice aisle. "See," Elizabeth smiled, "nothing can stop you." "I wish you had more time," Sarah whispered. "I have exactly enough to see my son marry the right woman, to know my grandchildren are safe, to make peace with the past." Robert entered with the twins. "Victoria said yes," Michael announced. "Under guard quickly," Elizabeth nodded. "Good. Now about tomorrow." "Mom, you need rest. I need to see my family whole, one last time." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She found Robert in the chapel. "Having doubts?" he asked. "About the wedding?" "No. About forgiving Victoria." "Mom says forgiveness isn't about the other person," Thomas spoke from the shadows. "It's about freeing yourself." "When did you get so wise?" Sarah asked. "Grandma's been teaching us." In her hospital room, Elizabeth watched the sunrise. "Just one more day," she prayed. "Let me see them happy." Victoria was escorted to her cell's window. "Look," her guard said. "The sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. A new day," Victoria whispered. "A chance to make things right." At the Harrison mansion, Michael stood in his old room. "Everything's different now." "Better different?" Thomas asked. "Yeah, better." The wedding was hours away. Sarah stood before a mirror, practicing her steps. Robert reviewed security plans with Victoria's guards. Elizabeth chose her dress with trembling hands. And somewhere between past and future, a broken family prepared to become whole again. Not perfect, but stronger for having been broken and rebuilt with love. The hospital chapel filled with morning light as guests arrived for the wedding. Sarah stood in Elizabeth's room, making final adjustments to her simple white dress. "I didn't think this day would come," Elizabeth said from her wheelchair. Her oxygen tank hummed quietly beside her. The twins entered in matching suits, followed by 2 guards escorting Victoria. She wore prison orange, hands cuffed. "You look beautiful, Sarah," Victoria said softly. Michael stepped between them instinctively. Thomas touched his brother's arm. "It's okay," Sarah said. "Victoria, you can sit with Elizabeth." "First," Victoria held out her cuffed hands. "I have something to confess." Elizabeth leaned forward. "We know about Morrison poisoning Robert's father." "No, something else." Victoria turned to the twins. "I sent those photos to Robert all these years. Pictures of you growing up. I couldn't stop watching over you, even while I was trying to destroy your family." "Why?" Michael demanded. "Because you were everything I could never have. A real family, real love." Thomas walked to the piano. The first notes of Amazing Grace filled the room. "That song," Victoria whispered. "Mom taught us after the accident," Thomas explained. "She said music heals." She was right. Victoria turned to Sarah. "I know sorry isn't enough, but watching you fight for these boys, seeing how strong your love is, I understand now what I tried to destroy." Sarah touched Victoria's arm. "Hate hurts the person holding it most." Elizabeth's words? Her final lesson to all of us. The chapel bells chimed. Time to begin. Robert waited at the altar, his father's Bible in his hands. The evidence clearing his father's name had given him peace at last. The guests rose as Thomas began the wedding march. Michael escorted Elizabeth down the aisle, her oxygen tank decorated with white ribbons. Then Sarah appeared, alone, strong, each step a victory. Halfway down the aisle she faltered. Before anyone could move, Victoria slipped free from her guards and caught Sarah's arm. "Let me help," Victoria said. "Please, one good thing before I go back." Sarah nodded. Together they walked to Robert. "Who gives this woman?" the priest asked. "Her children," Michael said clearly. "And those who learn to love her," Victoria added, stepping back to join Elizabeth. The ceremony was simple. Robert and Sarah had weathered enough drama. "The rings?" the priest asked. Thomas played a chord. Michael brought forward a pillow. "These rings belong to my father and mother," Elizabeth explained. "A legacy of real love, not wealth or power." As Robert and Sarah exchanged vows, Elizabeth's breathing grew labored. Victoria noticed first. "Keep going," Elizabeth whispered when Victoria tried to call for help. "Let me see this." The priest pronounced them husband and wife. Robert kissed his bride as Thomas played triumphantly. Elizabeth smiled. "Now my family is complete." Her eyes closed. "Mom?" Robert rushed to her side. "Get a doctor," Sarah called. But Elizabeth's face was peaceful. She had held on long enough. Victoria wept openly. She waited for this moment. The twins kept playing, their music carrying their grandmother home. Later at the reception, Sarah danced with Robert, her steps sure and strong. The Harrison Foundation's first rehabilitation center opens next week, Robert said. Named after Elizabeth? She insisted it be named after you, the Sarah Mitchell Center for Family Healing. Michael tapped his father's shoulder. Mom promised me a dance, too. As Sarah danced with her son, Victoria prepared to return to prison. Wait, Thomas called. He hugged her quickly. Grandma said to give you this. Victoria opened Elizabeth's letter. A recommendation for early parole and a job offer at the new center. Everyone deserves a second chance, Sarah said. Elizabeth taught us that. 1 year later, the Sarah Mitchell Center buzzed with activity. Children played in the therapy room while their mothers attended job training classes. Sarah walked confidently through the halls, her wheelchair donated to a new patient. In the music room, Thomas taught piano to kids with disabilities. Michael led a support group for children of divorce. Victoria, recently paroled, managed the office. Her walls held photos of families helped by the center. Robert entered with the latest statistics. 200 families helped in our first year. Elizabeth would be proud, Sarah said. She is, Thomas called from the piano. Listen. As his music filled the center, Sarah looked at her family. Robert, strong and humble. Michael, protective and wise. Thomas, healing hearts through music. Even Victoria, finding redemption in service. Their journey had been painful, but every step, every struggle had led them here. To a place where broken families found hope, where love conquered hate, where second chances changed lives. This was their American dream. Not wealth or power or perfect appearances, but a family strong enough to weather any storm. A legacy of love that would touch generations. Ready to go home? Robert asked. Sarah watched a mother take her first steps in physical therapy while her children cheered. We are home, she said. This is exactly where we're meant to be. Thomas played the final notes of Amazing Grace as the sun set on another day of healing, hope, and the kind of love that transforms lives. In her office, Victoria placed a new photo on her wall. Elizabeth smiling at her grandchildren on her last day. You were right, Victoria whispered. Love does heal everything. And in that moment, every broken piece had finally found its place in a story of redemption, forgiveness, and the triumph of love over hatred. As evening settled over the center, Robert gathered everyone in the main hall. Staff, patients, and families turned expectantly as he took the microphone. 1 year ago, my mother Elizabeth had a vision. Not just of healing bodies, but of healing hearts. Today I'm proud to announce the Elizabeth Harrison Memorial Scholarship. Sarah stepped forward. This program will provide full college funding for children of single parents in our program, because education breaks the cycle of hardship. Victoria joined them, carrying a stack of acceptance letters. Our first recipients are here tonight. 10 teenagers stepped up, including a girl who'd been paralyzed in a car crash. She'd learned piano from Thomas, courage from Sarah, and now planned to study physical therapy. But there's more, Robert continued. The Harrison Foundation is opening 5 new centers across the country, each one following our model of family healing. Michael whispered to his brother, Grandma would love this. Thomas nodded and went to the piano. As he played, a screen lowered showing photos of the past year. Sarah teaching a mother to walk again. Michael helping a boy cope with divorce. Thomas's first piano recital with his students. Victoria mentoring women returning to work. Robert reading to children in the playroom. Families finding strength together. Every story here started with pain. Sarah took the microphone. My accident, my children's loss, our broken family. But pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. She walked to a young mother struggling with crutches. Karen here told me she'd never walk again. Today, she's taking steps toward her new job. Karen smiled through tears. Because you showed me how. Victoria stepped forward. I was once the villain in this story, the one who caused pain instead of healing it. But even villains can change when shown real love. She gestured to a group of women she'd counseled. These mothers taught me that strength isn't about power or control. It's about getting back up, about choosing love over hate. Robert watched his sons among the crowd. Michael, once so angry, now helped other children process their pain. Thomas, who'd stopped playing after his mother's accident, now filled the center with healing music. The American dream isn't about wealth, Robert said. It's about building something meaningful, something that outlasts us. As if on cue, Elizabeth's favorite biblical quote appeared on screen. Love never fails. Sarah took Robert's hand. 1 year ago, we made vows in a hospital chapel to love, honor, and cherish. But we didn't just make those vows to each other. We made them to every family that walks through these doors, Robert finished. Thomas began playing Amazing Grace as the screen showed a final photo, Elizabeth in her wheelchair, surrounded by her family on that last perfect day. Mom always said music heals, Thomas told the crowd. But it's not just music, it's love, family, hope. Victoria wiped tears as she watched her former prisoners help serve dinner to the families. Elizabeth knew, she said softly, love is stronger than hate, always. As night fell, the Harrison family stood in Elizabeth's old office, now a cozy library for the center's children. She'd love all this, Michael said, touching his grandmother's photo. She sees it, Sarah smiled. Every time we help a family heal, every time we choose love over hate, every time we remember that pain isn't the end of the story. Robert pulled out Elizabeth's last letter, found after her death. He read it often, but tonight felt right to share. My dearest family, pain brought you together. Love made you whole. Now take that love and multiply it. Let it heal other families. Let it change lives. Let it be your legacy. Remember, every broken piece has a purpose. Every scar tells a story of survival. And love, real love, never fails. With eternal faith in you all, Elizabeth. Thomas sat at the piano one last time that night. As his music filled the halls, families held each other close, healing together. This was their American dream. Not a perfect family, but a real one. Not a life without pain, but one where pain transformed into purpose. And somewhere, Elizabeth smiled as love continued to heal, one family at a time. In the quiet center, under stars that seemed to shine with extra brightness, the Harrison family had finally found their true legacy. Not in wealth or power, but in the simple, profound act of helping others heal. It was more than a happy ending. It was a new beginning. For them, and for every family that would find hope within these walls. And that was the greatest dream of all. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like and share it with someone who needs hope today. Drop a comment below sharing your own story of healing and forgiveness. Your words might be exactly what another person needs to hear. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Remember, sometimes our greatest pain becomes our greatest purpose.